Welcome everybody to the next edition of Rally's Founder Talk. Today we have Ian Cummins. Ian, obviously Ben and I have we've been working alongside of you for quite some time, and I've watched your journey go from, I think it's EA Sports through Rochambeau, out of that into Third Time, and then into Glue. And so we'll talk a lot about that. But one of the things I want to say is that when we were thinking about the people that we wanted to bring on to these founders talks, I immediately thought about you, because one of our goals is to help people see Orlando as an international destination for social entrepreneurship. So as anybody who's a social entrepreneur internationally, as they navigate down their pathway in their venture, that Orlando will be one of those stops. And so we wanted to use these opportunities to showcase the kind of talent, the kind of people that we have here locally. And you're one of those good representations of that, one of those hidden gems. And so we want to bring you out, polish you up, and present you to the world.
Thank you. Very, very nice of you.
Yeah, man. So Ian, tell us a little bit about who you are before we jump into the full conversation.
Yeah, so at this point, I still am, like, my day-to-day job is often writing video game code. I am obsessed with being a software engineer, and that's not how I started in the video game industry, but that is now what I do almost all the time, and it's what I love to do. I do it outside of work, I do it during work, I do it all the time. It's just really obsessed with the reward that you get from starting with a blank sheet of code, and then something's working, and then users can play it, and then taking that, fast forwarding to now this sort of incredible world that we live in, that, like, you can make an app that can be downloaded anywhere and is downloaded anywhere, and people are using it in the most insane locations, places I never even knew about or didn't know. And so that's basically what I still do. I do run a studio here, so there's now 12 employees here in Orlando. And prior to that, I had my own little indie studio that was self-funded, and that was where I worked with Kyle and Ben. We were in the same co-working space for a few years, 3 or 4 years, it feels like. Yeah. And that was usually a team of 3, and we grew to about a team of 5 right before we got acquired.
Right. But before that, like, when I first met you, I think you were coming out of EA, and over there you were developing the Madden game, or?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. So Madden football was my favorite game as a kid. I played it all the time on my Sega Genesis. Madden 93, Madden 94. You see some nodding heads.
Yeah.
And so it just so happened that I was, when I got to college, I was really still into video games. I played video games all the time. And a friend of mine won a video game tournament for college football, and they invited him to come be a tester here in Orlando. This was in Knoxville, Tennessee.
Okay.
And so he said, "Yeah, I'll come. Can one of my buddies come?" And they're like, "Yeah, whatever, we don't care." And so I came down the sophomore of my college, tenure, sophomore year, and was a game tester on Madden 2000. And it was like, oh, this is it. This is what I always wanted. And so I dropped out of school and stayed in Orlando. And then by Madden 2010, I was the creative director. And throughout that time, I learned to write code and was learning to be an engineer. And so by the time Madden 10 came around and I was the creative director, I'd finally hit this pinnacle of what I thought. I was in control of the game that I'd loved. I found out that role really sucks, and it's just making PowerPoints all day and talking to executives, and you don't really get to work on the game anymore. And so that's when I left and started kind of going more into startup entrepreneurial stuff, because I did want a little more control, and I felt like I was better at making games. At the beginning, all I knew how to do was tell other programmers how to make games to varying levels of success. And so, it was a long, like, kind of corporate ladder journey there at EA. It was a lot of fun. but it was just sort of like trying for promotions every year and working my way up, and then
Right.
once I got to the top, I didn't like it at all. So
And, and so you
I left.
use so for you, entrepreneurship wasn't necessarily like, hey, I want to start my own business. Really, it was pure for you. It's just like, hey, I just want to build games, and I would love to be able to build my own game. And then as you made the transition through within a corporation to be able to who you were building games for, and you moved up, it took you further away from the thing you were doing. And so you looked at entrepreneurship as a way of getting back to building your own game,
Yeah.
back into, okay.
Being
Okay.
hands-on, and even once I was running my own company after, a couple of years there, when we can get into that story of how that just kind of, again, I say accidentally sort of happened.
Yeah.
I started, the things that turned me off were the like running the business part, the
Okay.
the taxes and the HR and the setting up health insurance. Those were the things that because that was not what I wanted to do. I wanted to just make games.
You're right.
Um, so that was, a big striking negative point for me, is like I needed someone else to do that stuff, and it was only me when we were a little tiny, indie shop.
Right.
And that
And
was
this is with
that was
third time.
that was with third time. Yeah.
Okay. Walk us through if you can. I don't,
Yeah.
I don't know how
So,
sensitive I'm really interested in the jump from EA to
mhm.
Rochambeau.
Yeah,
Uh,
no, for sure. So, that was around Madden 12. I was the creative director and super burned out, working tons of hours. EA, as if anyone didn't know, is a real notorious crunch culture. You would hit, basically around April each year, and you're not seeing your family till, August,
mhm.
basically. And so I didn't have kids yet, and I was married, but it was just starting to get kind of strenuous. And so it just so happened, one of the heads of of our studio there was kind of forced out in a restructuring, and a lot of us really loved him, and that's Philip Holt, which you
Yeah.
guys know. And so he was sort of like treated pretty poorly on this exit, and so he just came back to a few of us, the senior people there at Tiburon, and said, would you jump if I raise some money? And we're all like, absolutely, of course. And so we had a few secret meetings, and he went and raised some money from venture capital in North Carolina, and so that was it. We all on one single day, everybody walked out at the same time. It's awesome. It's like
That's brutal.
crazy. Yeah, it was just this crazy, like everyone was freaking out, and so we all jumped to Rochambeau and tore through that runway in about a year and a half, and then we were broke, and
Yeah.
uh, so it was over. The dream was over. So they had to basically pivot that studio into a little more of like a data analytics thing.
Yeah, I remember that.
The game company sort of had to just bail.
I think
Right.
So
I'm really,
that was a good experience, though. Amazing experience. I learned so much in that, like 10 times more in that year and a half, 2 years, compared to the decade at
Yeah.
EA.
I think that story though of like you start down a career because it's a thing that you love and it evolves into something that you don't recognize anymore
Mm.
is a a common refrain in the entrepreneurial space. I mean, a lot of times you hear people really animated by a particular problem, they want to go and solve it, but also you hear a lot of times people who start in a career and climb up and all of a sudden they don't recognize who they are anymore. They don't appreciate the work that they're doing. They're disconnected. They're in a machine rather than in a close to the work that they love, and they leave. And so I think that that's that day when you leave, making that leap um, takes a recognition of like what you actually do love, who you really are, um, a willingness for risk that sets you up to be an entrepreneur. So not everyone, once they have that realization, makes the move you do, right? Some
Yeah.
people buy boats and vacation homes and do something else to cope with.
Escape, right?
Yeah, so they do something else besides like take this big life altering risk and start something. Um, besides the like, oh, this is the work that I love, was there anything else that you point to that's like, oh yeah, I'm the kind of person that likes to take that risk or knows it will work out or has this optimism?
I mean, yeah, it's at some point there, obviously, it may seem humble, but I am really confident in my skills. And especially there at the end of EA, it felt like I was absolutely at the top of my game. Like I could just tell. And it was like I wasn't doing the things that I had really started to get good at. And I wasn't able to do them. And it was so frustrating, nearly every day, almost every day at EA, I would be 10 till 5 in meetings. I'd get 30 minutes to go and like look at the game, and it would boot up and crash, and then I'm back in another meeting. It was like just the most horrible experience from what used to be this really fun, like I'm with a group of people and we're testing and we're making changes every day. So yeah, it was just really a death by a thousand cuts on a lot of those things that it eventually just was totally unrecognizable. And jumping into there was a lot of risk there, and I was definitely nervous for the things like health insurance, which is annoying that you have to be so scared about that. But my wife and I wanted to have a child, and we were like, okay, is this new startup going to even have insurance? Is it going, and so there was a lot of that for Philip that he had to take on, that he's basically trying to take away 10 plus senior executive kind of level people from EA, and he has to basically come up with a package that is matching what EA has, a studio of 3,000-4,000 employees. And so he did that, but looking back, it's sort of like that ripped through the runway, and it's like if he was going to do an agile little startup, you kind of tell everyone, hey, you need to take a pay cut. Hey, we're not going to have the insurance that you used to have. But I just don't think he probably wouldn't have been able to grab a bunch of us at that time. I think a lot of us would have been like, well, I don't know, we're doing okay. It's not that bad. So that's always a tough one, especially here, that you're having to tell people to make that sacrifice. And even at third time, having to get these healthcare plans that are just so subpar compared to what you had at EA, and trying to recruit people out of EA to take that step down, even though it's so much more fun 40 hours that you're spending, or 80. It's just like that was really challenging. But yeah, that was key, I think, was still having that safety net of a few of the benefits, even when we did make the jump.
That brings up two things, but before I go, one, it's like you've made good choices as you built it, and you just highlighted one there of like analyzing what you can actually afford versus what you do in startup. But the other thing it makes me think of is last week we talked to one of our rally makers, Rajiv Menon, and he was talking about how often entrepreneurialism takes I can't remember his word exactly, but takes a sledgehammer to your self-confidence. And I think that entrepreneurs, like you mentioned, tend to be very confident. I believe I can solve this problem. I can build this thing, right? And you need to have that. But I imagine that as you've been building games, especially, there are moments where that confidence takes a hit. Do you find that to be true in building stuff, that it challenges your self-confidence?
Yes, absolutely. Definitely in a super aggressive and competitive business, and it's hit driven, and it's so simple to just make tiny little changes or mistakes that can like really bury you. And just as we can get into third time just really quickly, but for example, third time, which was my company, this is like the third year in, we're building a brand new game, and we're just kind of rushing, trying as fast as we can to get to market. We built it in around 6 months and get out to market. And we had hired an artist an old friend of mine, and to draw just a character. This was a horse racing game, and so we needed a picture of a person who looked like a horse racing announcer to use in marketing videos. It's just this guy standing there. He got headphones on. That's it. That's it. It's just a picture. So she draws him. We put him in the game. We put him in all the marketing assets. We didn't sign a contract with her because she's an old friend of mine. Everything's all good. And then, a month later, we get a lawsuit from the guy that she drew. She drew a real guy. And it's a $250,000 lawsuit to settle right away. And, you know, I don't have that. I'm barely making paychecks each month, you know,
Yeah.
and so sure enough, I mean, she drew the dude straight up. There's no comparison. There's no way to get out of it. It's like the same tie. It's like a picture she found.
Right.
And she, you know, everything is exactly him. And it turns out he was the guy that called the Triple Crown every year on ABC for like 30 years. I mean, this guy's like very famous in horse racing, but we didn't know. And, and and so he's a legit person. He has trademark statements, you know, like down the stretch they come. He owns that trademark and stuff,
Oh.
you know. And so anyway, we basically had to just swallow it and settled for 50 grand. And so there's your confidence killer right there of like, okay, everything's going okay. And then now I'm destroyed. I mean, 50 grand out of your sort of razor thin, barely making it work budget was just like almost a death blow. I mean, it was. I basically didn't take paychecks for a bunch, and get into all the weirdness. I had to start wiring money out as S corp dividends to try and save on taxes, and you know, there was just all kinds of like crazy things just to stay barely afloat for that year. So yeah, and there's plenty more things like that that have happened that we thought, well, you know what, we're doing really good. And then all of a sudden it just vanishes out from under you, and you do have to have a lot of it was so stressful. I mean, that those few years, it was like the highs are unbelievably high, the lows are unbelievably low. That's the big difference, I think.
So when we were also on that call in with last week with one of the rally makers, Rajiv, he was talking about the importance of understanding what you don't know, because he says like what you don't know will hurt you or can hurt you. And then he got into how, you know, understanding what you don't know and putting the right people in the teams around you. And when I listen to your story and think about your story and hear what you just said, one of the things is that, so at EA, you got into management and you just wanted to build the games. And that was the frustrating part, that you spent more time in that area. And so it feels like, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that Rochambeau, the component that was different was that you had Phil coming in, who it seems like was going to handle the business side of stuff and get you back to where you're just purely developing games. And then whatever happens there, and then you transition over in the third time, and you pick back up the management role that you so much hated. Because I remember you being extremely frustrated by all the stuff, and you just wanted to build games.
It's exactly right, and I mean that point of what you don't know is perfect. And every time I sort of would try, I wouldn't try hard enough at finding someone to delegate that responsibility to. You know, there was plenty of time where I could have hired someone to be a COO, or to even be a admin assistant, someone to handle some of that extra paperwork. I mean, if I had a COO or I had a business person like aligned with me, they would have been like, let's go and make sure we get a contract with the artist. You know, anyone would have found those blind spots of mine where I'm like, let's just finish, let's get the game out, you know. And so that was definitely a blind spot and weak spot for me. And, you know,
so why didn't you get I mean, was there any reason why you didn't?
It's partly because there was this animosity towards business people that I'd built over at EA, where, you know, there was all these managers that were doing nothing but getting in my way, you know, perceptibly, that their job was to get the schedule down and to make us work extra hours. And so, you know, it was like, there was this, so I just have been really like anti-management since that stretch at EA. And obviously I think I've lightened on that quite a bit. But I think it really was just like, I had a limited budget. I had a budget for 3 or 4 or 5 employees. And I never thought, well, I don't have enough for someone to do, you know, full time in the business world. But I really should have gone harder at like finding they call them producers in, you know, in games often. And like, I could have found a production intern that still could have been entering data into the game and still could have been working on the game, but then also could have been doing a lot of administrative, you know, overhead business things. And I even interviewed like a few kids from FIA, the master's degree, that were really interested in entrepreneurial stuff.
Right.
And we're going through classes on, I've never taken business classes. They already were ahead of me on that stuff. And I just thought, well, I still need a programmer, and then we
Yeah.
hired Chris, and it was just sort of like, so I tilted it so far into that indie development that it was just, I didn't have any money to hire someone else, but I definitely could have, looking back, done that.
And I like that. I want to point out that it's not that he didn't have the money or the resources, right? It's that in that situation, he felt like what he needed most was this creative person. And he probably did. I mean, in the end, it cost you 50 grand. How much would the producer have cost you, right? Like,
Right.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But the point is that when we're choosing to ignore our blind spots, we're not doing it on purpose. So as much as you can, the deeper you have a realistic perception of what you're good at, so that you also have a realistic perception of what you're not good at, so that you know who to hire or what intern to take on, and get somebody that's different from you on the team to offset your blind spots. You can do that very early, and as early as you can, you'll miss fewer of those spaces.
Yeah, I think like Ben, as you were saying that, and I'm listening to Ian, and I think back on the conversation we had with Rajiv, the lean business canvas and the way that it forces one to look at all the components, and all the components need to be addressed, right? Like who the customer is, what product are you delivering, making sure you're delivering a product that delivers value. And then you have all the business stuff that trails after that, right? Like the stuff that requires running, like how are we gonna market this thing, what is the revenue, what is the stuff. And so like it's like so when I think about all of that, it's accepting, like for Ian, like he wanted to build the game, and I'm sorry, Ian, I'm not talking as though you're not in the room, but he wanted to build the game. But the thing is that we always talk about in entrepreneurship is that, and we're talking about here is it's just like part of what you said was you discounted the whole other piece of that sheet, where the operational stuff, which is the mechanism that needs to run in order to keep the game moving forward. But you say you built up this animosity, so that was really cool that you were able to be able to admit that and change your perspective on it. But yeah, so keeping all those things in play and not discounting, because we're like, okay, well, we're good, we can still move the company forward if we don't do this, but having respect for all those components is absolutely key as we move down this journey.
I think I was just going to throw in too, I think there's just enough things that I never quite tried hard enough either at finding people that might be a little more willing to take this as like a side hustle and give them a piece of the pie. I mean, that was the thing. I had equity. I owned the entire company. I had all these things that I could have offered to people to say, like, look, take 5% of the company and just handle the damn healthcare, and
right.
and have someone that could kind of basically, eat what they kill sort of role, where they're not a salaried employee, but they're like just there to help me almost as an advisor and give them a cut. I could have done that, and I didn't, because the company equity to me didn't really matter that much. It was just sort of like, sure, help. But I didn't have salary. I was like hyper focused on that monthly runway. And so, but yeah, that's one thing I wish I had done a little bit more of.
So when you speak back, you say you learned a lot about your time. There are some things you learned during your time at Rochambeau, where, just for the audience sake, and help massage it or clarify this for us if I get this wrong, but you initially started off building games, and then the game portion didn't take off the way that you expected it to take off, and then but there was a component of the engine that was running the game that you can use for business analytics, and then it goes off into basically you pivoted into like this business analytics engine,
right?
And so you guys weren't those kind of people. Immediately you're kind of like off mission and unaligned. So talk to us about, are there things about that experience that you learned that you would like to be able to share?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, especially if you know, got a bunch of entrepreneurs in here. I think there were so many great lessons of that experience. And the first one was, you know, who you raise money with is who you're going to be married to your rest of your life. And so that's not something that you can take lightly. And that happened with Third Time as well, who I signed a publishing deal with. I sure wish I could take back some of the terms of that publishing deal. You know, it ended up burying a lot of the business. But with Rochambeau, you know, Philip leaves. He goes and raises money. He goes and tries to raise money, and he fails because he has a PowerPoint. And he says, "I'm going to build a cool game. Trust me. Uh, I'm going to hire 12 really expensive people from EA. Trust me." And they're all like, "No." So he goes back. He takes one of the senior tech engineers. They draft this pitch that is interesting to a lot more investors, which is we're going to build games and we're going to build analytics tech behind the games that will make the games successful. Two arms. They likened it on every deck to Pixar. Pixar wrote a render engine that was unparalleled by anyone else. Then they had a creative studio that used the rendering engine to make Toy Story. And so then they could sell the rendering engine forever, and then they could be creative with their, you know, that was the pitch. And so we would make business like analytics to drive game behavior. And so the first game went out, and it turns out we had to split the team in two. So 12 people split on an analytics engine and a game engine is not enough. And so that's why we ripped through all that money. We made like basically 1.5 games before we were out of money. And the analytics engine was kind of like barely working, you know. So it's just one of those things that like too big of a pitch for too small of a team, and then having to go back and keep begging for more money. When you have no revenue, you have nothing. You know, there was a lot of like, so we're just getting killed on every round in terms of dilution and all that stuff. So it was basically like, yeah. And at some point, after the second or third bridge loan or whatever, they're like, we're not going to fund the games anymore because you don't really seem to have any path to make any money in games. The investors now owned more than 50% of the company. So that was sort of it. You know, there was no decision on our part of like, let's just take one more shot at a new game. Here's why we think it's going to work. There was no option because in order to get paid to get another, for the company to stay afloat at all, they had to basically just axe the game business.
Right.
And so, you know, that was the cautionary tale for me. It was like, you know, he did not have enough equity to build that sort of a long tail thing. They basically were immediately within a year and a half fully controlled by what the investor wanted to do and the board. So yeah, it's, you know, it's a scary proposition. I mean, it's not easy for someone to build a bunch of equity themselves and have, you usually do need investors, but I guess it's about picking the right ones that, you know, maybe believe in the vision a little bit more.
Because it seemed like,
or we'll give you more time to do it. And, you know, again, we burned through that money so fast too. It's just sort of like, it's tough to say that anything would have changed it, you know?
Yeah, it seems like, you like the original thing is like you guys wanted, like when you said Phil walked in with a deck and saying like, look, we can build great games, we're gonna have we have a team behind us, like you folks had all the credibility and the talent to do that, right?
Yeah,
pure sense, right? And to me, I thought you were going to say that the investors like, yeah, we're on board, because
so,
you know, it's like because they always say like with investors, it's either they're betting on a couple things. One, is it the right, excuse me for using this terminology, but it's like horse racing. You're either betting on the jockey or the horse or the race, right? Oftentimes you want to make sure, if it's not a good jockey, you want to make sure it's the right horse in the right race. And you're like, okay, we can do subpar jockeys. But in your cases, you guys were the jockeys, and I would have bet on your team to make a great game purely because you're a right jockey, and I believe that you would find the right race and the right horse to win, right? But when you said that they didn't buy into that, you went back, and something about the decision making, not to try to lay blame or anyway, but you kind of compromise off of that and attached, like kind of changed the heart and nature of who you were, and brought on this extra component which added this burden that was first unaligned with what you guys want to do from a passion standpoint, and then also your skill sets, and
Yeah.
it doubled your area. Like you had to split your team to
Yeah.
satisfy both things, and that was it. So
And you mentioned we weren't very good at that, at that time. And like, as from the investor's point of view, like investing in a business analytics company is a great idea, especially back then. This was like 2011. Facebook was just getting going. Twitter all these companies were just now, like, the data was pouring in. And there were other companies in that space. Swerve was one, that was another one. Splunk. These were two companies that were like firing to the top. They were probably going to go IPO, $1 billion, no time. And I'm looking around and saying, like, we're going to compete with those guys. Like, we have 3 engineers over here. It was just sort of like, because we were, if all 12 people were working on analytics and we had our acumen, maybe, but we were still all game makers. We weren't analytics. Like, we didn't know big data, or any of we didn't know algorithm stuff on database structures. So we knew games. And so it was just sort of a weird match to, like, we threw that in to get funded, and it really kind of like was the death blow. It's like it was too much of a hamstring, because we never could have executed on that with that team.
I think this is important. It happens in I came up through nonprofit space, so I knew it happened in nonprofit, but I'm learning that it happens in for-profit venture raising too, where we get confused about who our customer is. Where in nonprofits, we think the grant writer is our customer, and so we tell them whatever they want to hear, and we begin to deliver products that they're looking for. And now the nonprofit is chasing the grant raising dollars. And it happens in when we're looking to raise money, we can forget that who our customer is and feel like our goal is to get the investment from the venture backers. And then we pivot our whole proposal or strategy around the venture backers and not around the customer that's actually going to drive the engine of the company. And so that's why we spend a lot of time really trying to help make sure that we have a tight business plan that has a customer with a clear problem. And then once you have that and it makes sense, you can go back to the venture or venture backer and convince them that the investor that this machine will work. But when that gets out of order, when we get ahead of ourselves and start pitching an advocate as though and redesigning the solution or the product for them, and then the customer's the afterthought to make this funder happy, everything gets out of order. It's an easy thing to do when we're starting up, because we're looking at this team that we want to be able to afford, and we'll look for the customer later. But it's harder than we ever think it is to sell something to a customer. And so you can't do that later. You've got to build from that from the beginning.
Yeah. Ian, so what other lessons did you take out of Rochambeau before we move to the third time?
Well, yeah, I mean, with Rochambeau, it was about this total underestimation of what EA did for us from a marketing perspective. We just had literally zero idea how important that was. So we all were like, we're really good at making games, and we're awesome, and therefore people will love what we make, and it will spread through word of mouth. And so we jumped ship and made a Facebook game first, right at the time where Facebook games were blowing up, and at that time, the reason Facebook games were blowing up is because Facebook had not locked down their feed. As you remember, it was like Farmville requests firing everywhere at all times. And like Zynga had cracked that code. They, shot from nothing to $1 billion company in like a year. And we were coming in and saying, we're not going to do that. That's just gross. People are going to play this game because they like this game. And it's just like total stupid thing. I mean, it really was like no shot at success. We put this game out. We put a Facebook game out that was kind of like a battling game and won awards, critical success in terms of people that played those. And no one played and no one stayed. I mean, we got hundreds of thousands of installs because you could do that. It was just so easy at that time. And no one would stay and play because we actively refused to put in that loop of annoying your friends to keep playing.
Yeah.
Which is how all those games were working. And so we had no marketing because we were just like, well, we're better than that. You know, EA's marketing budget is usually double what the game's budget is, just so everybody knows. If it costs 10 million to make Madden, it costs 20 or 30 to market it. And so we just like had zero plan to actually grow, and we sabotaged the one way that there was to grow because we just wanted to be pure. We thought that stuff was slimy, and apparently it didn't matter. So yeah, that was the big learning there. I mean, in the second game, we made a mobile game second that was a word, like kind of like Words with Friends, but
yeah, I like that game.
On that.
I used to play
That game was great, and that game had amazing retention in terms of people came back and played it every day. But similarly, we had no marketing like footprint. We did not have 10 million to market that. We were out of money by the time that game came out.
Okay.
And we were just hoping all of our friends and family would tell everyone.
Right.
And so that is kind of what happened. It grew outward, but it had no revenue because it was a fun game. We were just kind of anti-slimy free-to-play gaming mechanics. But you know, that's maybe my fault. Maybe it's Philip's. Someone should have been like, well, how are we going to make money here? You know, like it didn't. But it was sort of weird because half of the time when we would go to Philip and say like, look, there's no revenue in this game. You know, there was still like, well, this will be a good business case for the analytics system. You know, like we will have shown 3x growth using the analytics. You know, so because there was always like a scapegoat. Well, revenue is actually not that important. We can move this thing when it's like, it could have been if we had shown that game had maybe made back its money at least, then the investor maybe would have said, hey, keep making games. But
right.
So yeah, similar. It's all that sort of like being split into, and then also taking total like just not paying attention to how much that marketing machine helped us before.
Yeah, it's the I mean, it's going back to what we originally were saying. It's and what we also say to our fellows is it's like we have to pay attention to the entire business canvas, right? And
There's
yeah,
a lot. There's a lot to worry about. Yeah,
there is a lot to worry about because at the end of the day, this thing has to be sustainable, right? So whether it earns just enough money to exist and continue to exist, or whether it earns more money to exist and to grow, it has to be sustainable. And we have to take all pieces of that canvas seriously. And I may not initially want to do the P&Ls or the balance sheets or the, you know, all the marketing stuff, and my talent may be here, but very quickly I have to recognize that I have to lift all of those well if I want this thing to work. And so I have to start bringing on the people. I have to know what I don't know because it will hurt me, and then I have to start bringing on the right people around me in order to lift all pieces. And so hopefully, like you say, you kind of you lost your animosity towards the business side. It sounds like you have a lot of respect for it now.
Well, I can really resonate with that because I feel like I started coffee because I wanted people to realize that their supply chains mattered, that they affected people's lives. And so I worked hard to source this coffee from the smallest regions as possible, hack the supply chain. And then, like, not only did I let people name their price in the coffee shop, I kept no record of what people paid. Yeah. People would say, how much do people pay for a cup of coffee? I don't know. That's not the point. You know, I just deal with whatever money comes in. And at some point, somebody was like, I mean, that's fine. But if you want to know what you're doing, or be able to plan for the future, or be able to expand the opportunity for other people to get connected, you have got to have some kind of system to measure what's going on, pay attention, maximize the amount of money that you're planning with. And I think that's a regular thing for entrepreneurs because we hear that pretty regularly in the program. Like, I'm a purist. I don't want to pay attention to that part. And I don't need to pay attention to that part because I believe just in the cause. And it's important, I think, that people have the opportunity to do that. You can believe just in the cause. But then you make a beautiful game that's so good that you don't need a marketing budget. Your friends and family pass it around. And then when you're out of money, you fold up and you go do something else because
Yep.
it doesn't make any money, right?
Yep.
And now you had the beautiful experience of creating the great game, and it did what we wanted, and now we go on and do something else because we didn't want to build a business, we just wanted to build a great game. And I had to make that decision with coffees. Like, if I'm going to want to build something with longevity that continues to buy coffee from my friends at Origin, I'm going to have to make it a business, not just a coffee dispensary, you know? And you, sounds like you had to make that decision too. Like, I'm going to have to make a business, not just a pure game factory or something.
Yeah, and that's sort of, we haven't really gone into it, but basically when Rochambeau folded, I actually chose to go to Zynga because I wanted to learn that business part. And it was like, I had just gone through this like pure creative experience, amazingly great team. And Zynga over here is like printing money on Farmville posts about you need to water your crops. And I'm just like, how in the world? And so that was it. I went to Zynga for basically about a year and a half and was just like, I looked at every single PowerPoint deck, every single wiki Confluence page. I looked at every single thing that they had made to try and crack the code of what they had done and what they were doing. And so then that's during Zynga is when I started to make the game that became the third time founding.
Yeah, which I thought it was when you, okay, so when you made that jump. So I'm glad that you added that piece, because I now I understand why the success of the initial horse racing game, it makes me appreciate the success of the horse racing game, because it jumped from the moment you put it out to like 1 million downloads, and people kept using it. And I felt like at some point you guys were printing money. And when I went to use it, there were those components which you had to pay.
Yeah, slimy. Yeah, right.
But you can see clearly the lessons both on this thing has to earn money, and then this thing has to be marketed, being that you've learned being expressed through that game, which is really cool. So
Story too, because I feel like, Ian, the more I hear about your story, you're perpetually learning. Like, you're not afraid to like learn something new and read and study. I feel like that's as unique a trait as being an entrepreneur, the capacity to always be learning like that, not be intimidated, jump in and be self-motivated to learn more. Not everybody has that. That has helped you and served you well, it sounds like.
Not only video games, but served them well in weightlifting, in your deadlifting. I'm like, why is this guy?
My deadlifting skills.
Your deadlifting, like you went, like your form was terrible, and I was like, why would anybody go to deadlifting to try to do this? This is technically one of the hardest things to pull off and to do it well. If you don't get it right, you will kill yourself. Literally.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And so I was just like, you're doing, but I'm coaching you in the background, and I can see you making these these little changes, and you got better, and you're still at it today. Like,
still at it,
plays, which goes right with what Ben said. You're constantly learning.
Yeah.
So at third time, the horse racing game does extremely well. You're learning some of the lessons, but still, one of the mistakes you feel like you made was not bringing on the business operation side fast enough, right? And so it gets you some issues, some areas where it puts some undue stress on the organization. Is there one, besides that, is there any other big lessons that came out of third time that you? Yeah,
I mean, the biggest regret I have there is, and I sort of alluded to, is the publishing deal. And so, basically in the backstory, I started to build this horse racing game in my spare time while I was at Zynga. I was just sort of, burnt. I did not like the Zynga management team. I thought I was going to form the studio myself in Orlando, and it turned out they had hired these other like goons to be my boss, and it just was not working. I was already at this mode where I was like, I felt like I was running the show, and then all of a sudden I'm like making PowerPoints for these guys. It was horrible, Yeah. And so I started building this horse racing game. I had this idea to make a horse racing game that I thought would work, and I released it in my spare time. And it basically, over the course of about a year, it would make like $60 in a week, and I would put the $60 right back into marketing, and then it would make 120, and I would put the 120 back into the marketing, being Facebook ads. That's all I did. And and just slowly but surely, just doing that, trading the money right back into the ad campaign, because I had a real job. All of a sudden it was making like almost double my salary. And I was like, oh, this is, I just really couldn't believe it. You know, it was like this game that
in Detroit, in the streets, they call that flipping the bird.
I was flipping the bird. And so it's good to know. And so over the course of that time, then it was like, well, you know, as these bosses of mine that I couldn't stand would try to give me stuff, I became like really antagonistic. I'm like, I'm not doing it, you know, I can quit any day. And but luckily, that studio, we all got laid off. The whole studio got closed by corporate. And so I'm sitting there with this game that's making, you know, maybe a few $100,000 a year. And I'm thinking, okay, well, I want to scale it. I now can go definitely do this full time. You know, the whole time I was wrestling, should I quit and work on this full time? But the layoff gave me this like, okay, I'm definitely going to do this full time. But so then I was really, really agonizing over, I needed more people to help me scale it. It needed server infrastructure. It needed better art. And so I had these two guys that were with me that I, you know, respected the hell out of. They were really great. And so I'm going to tell them, I show them all the metrics. I'm like, there's not enough money here to pay all three of us, but you guys want to take a leap? And if we do have the three of us, maybe we'll grow it. And so they were like, yeah, sure. They had severance. They didn't care. You know, they had 2 months of severance to try and make it work. And that was leading into the Kentucky Derby season, like leading right into that. And so we find this publisher, and basically they offer to run marketing for us and see if it works for free. And we're like, okay, yeah. And so they run it, and they find out, unbeknownst to me, basically, that the metrics are really, really solid. And so then they come back and say, we'd love to offer you a publishing deal. And so that was the main thing. It was like, all of a sudden, you know, I'm doing this thing myself. I'm making the Facebook ads. As you can see, I hated all this businessy stuff. I wasn't working on the game. I'm like doing marketing. I'm running advertising. I'm checking metrics. I'm doing all the stuff a business analyst, marketing person would be doing. And so, you know, I'm like, I kind of jump at this deal of like, oh, a publisher will do all that? Okay, great. And so they basically take over the game in terms of all the revenue flows through them, and we get paid at the end. And they grow it. I mean, they saw the metrics. It shot up the charts. It made, you know, millions in the first few months. And basically what I did not know was that there was no out. That was the main problem with that. And so like my looking back was the attorney that we hired was amazing, but I wish he had been a game attorney, because he would have said that's not normal. Because basically what happened is we rode the wave up, everybody got paid. And then a year and a half later, it starts to sink, as you might expect. And they will not relinquish any control back. And so then now we're stuck in a deal where the game doesn't make enough to pay us, and we have to keep supporting it. Right. And so that would have been any good lawyer, any good game lawyer would have said there's an out clause where if this isn't profitable for the studio, they can't support it. That's just, and everyone would probably be like, yeah, sure, that makes sense. You know, you shouldn't have to support a game that doesn't make enough money. And when you do, then you give the game back to the team. And because they take a big cut, right? And so basically what happens is it comes down that spike, and it's happening right now. Both of the games that we published through them, they also had exclusive rights to future sequels, which I wouldn't have gotten as well.
Right.
But anyway, these deals, we just kind of were green on the lawyer part. Then there was no way out. And again, it's just like being in bed with an investor, you're married to him forever. And so now these guys do literally nothing. This is now 3 years out. We're already still there. The company's still running these horse racing games, by the way, just, you know, headless kind of. And they're taking 30% of the revenue while doing zero work, no marketing, no nothing, no, you know, and so like all that money is just vanishing. And that could have kept Third Time alive a lot longer. You know, I chose to sell because I think it was a good idea. We could have stayed alive, but we weren't like killing it. We were always stressed. And if we had the ability to bail out of that publishing deal, especially the second game that we made, it was a super profitable game for a studio like ours. And with them running marketing and taking a cut, it was unprofitable. And so we could not, and I had, tons of just like awful meetings with them, where I'm like, I'm about to go to the press and tell you how predatory you are. I'm about to go to, and my co-founders are like, stop being so mean, you're going to, and so it turned into this really hostile thing where it's like, I just wanted my game back. They weren't even doing anything on it, but the contract I had, literally, it was ironclad. I had no way out. And so those two games, Photo Finish, my baby, I made that first horse racing game. I trademarked it, and they still have it. They don't do anything on it, and they take 30% of the money, and have been doing so for years. So that's my big horror story of, maybe it's game centric, but it's also investor. It's a similar thing that happened with Rochambeau. It's like, when you give people the keys, you better have a way to get them back, if you can.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing, and this theme is, and it's very interesting that it continues this week. Is just like, what you don't know will hurt you, right?
Yeah.
So,
and if I'd had a business person, or again, or an attorney, there's maybe, it is more of that. Like, I just took whatever attorney that, Philip knew a guy. He's great. He's an awesome attorney.
Yeah,
for sure. And he helped us in lots of deals, but like in that part, I needed a video game or a software attorney.
Like, it's hard to autopsy that stuff sometimes too, right? Because who knows where those games would have gone if you would have had those good years without them. And it's a really hard thing to do early on when you need something, and you don't know what you make a deal where you don't know what you're actually paying for it. So like the opportunity cost, what am I losing and what am I gaining? You can see what you're gaining easier than you can see what you're losing. And who is able to like predict success, right? Like confidently enough to like build deals on it, right? So it definitely.
It's also so hard to go in, like, at least for me, it was really difficult to go in and say no to these things. And over time that got better, but like, you feel like such a jerk, just weirdly, they're like, what, you have a problem with that line? What's wrong with that line in the contract? And you're like, well, I mean, does it have to be, can we cross it, and so what, like, obviously attorney should be the bulldog for you. And he also did a great job on negotiating some of those things. It was just really that one part that but Brian, like my co-founders, they were always like, it's fine, just take it, it's not, because he's definitely not as aggro, and you kind of really have to be super difficult in that stuff, and it's not natural, or they'll walk all over you. They can.
So for the people on the call, I mean, I feel like that, thinking about the strategic partnerships that you're in right now, and being able to go, what are my non-negotiables? What are the things I still want to be in charge of 10 years from now? What are the things I still want to be in charge of 5 years from now? And I'm willing to pay the cost of this revenue or this share or this equity, but I don't want to pay the cost of this. And maybe if Ian were able to think about it in categories like that and say, I don't want to give up control of this game. What does that look like? How do I get into this deal without completely giving up control of this game for the rest of its life?
I look at it. Just to add to what you're saying, Ben. It's just like being crystal clear about your purpose and mission, right? And knowing that is a non-negotiable for you. And I equate it to, like the investor thing. It's like who you get funding from will try to, if you give them enough control, will try to dictate and could potentially unalign you because of their own interests, unalign you with your mission and your purpose, and as a result, it puts an impact on you as the founder of the organization, and moves the organization in a completely different direction. So it becomes very important that you protect what's important to you, as Ben was saying. So for a lot of you, if you're running a company and and you know that the social mission is an important factor, you got to glue that stuff into your legals, right? Making sure that that's covered. So just like Ben saying, like being crystal clear on what your purpose and what are the non-negotiables and things, and that any conversation or move you move into, that you should be accessing it through that filter so it doesn't get you wonky and potentially become catastrophic for you. With these last few minutes left, we have about 12 minutes. I want to open it up to the group for questions. So does anybody have a question for Ian?
Yeah, I guess I just have a question about that last thing you guys were talking about. So, is it true that if you keep majority share, you can be the decision maker even if you have smaller investors?
Just depends on, you know, if there's like my charter for the corporation was actually even that no matter how many shares went out, I always had the final vote and everyone had to vote with me. So that was my way of giving up a bunch of equity to my friends and my co-founders without worry of them like throwing me out later. So my attorney did help me do that. Now Rochambeau again, and I learned that from Rochambeau, in essence, that they gave the ability to make decisions, you know, to the board, and the board eventually was more seats on the investor than the company. So in terms of the day-to-day, though, the publishing deal that I had, for example, I had full control over what to do, but they retained revenue share of my product, regardless of what they did. That was the big miss. So they, in essence, bled me dry by not doing anything. You know, they stopped spending, and now my margins are terrible because they're still getting a cut without applying any lift.
Yeah, I would say my business is at that point where I'm making strategic partnerships to kind of grow because I can't do that on my own. Don't have the revenue. But yeah, it sounds like if I'm willing to give away equity, I need to probably hire a lawyer and form partnerships that are like writing and not just handshake based.
Yes, yes, a good lawyer. Yes.
Yeah, I think, and the thing that I've learned too is it's hard sometimes when we're in the trenches on building the thing to imagine what success looks like. Like we can imagine it in broad categories, but specifics it's hard to imagine. So you can't really say, well, when this much money is coming in, how are we handling it? And how are the decisions made about what we're going to do with it? Or if this situation happens, and in that case, that's when someone who's experienced putting together deals can help you imagine those scenarios, and so you have written down and agreed on, if this happens, this is how we respond. If this happens, this is how we respond. And if you're in a strategic partnership where someone is coming in with investment or resources, you can make as a part of that deal a written contract together. So it's not necessarily having to come all out of your pocket to pay for that lawyer, but part of those monies are used to write a contract, right?
Yeah, and one of the things I want to also add on to that is that you, before you walk into these things, like I feel like the best thing to do is to like start to reach out to your network around people who have the subject matter expertise. That's why having the right mentors, having the right networks around you, so that you and then be able to be humble enough to step back and say, wait, hold on, it's possible that I don't know the scenario completely. Let me pull back. Let me consult my team and my mentors and network really quickly, or bring them to the table so I can cover any blind spots that I may have, or because I don't have the experience or the knowledge. And so to first, before you move into those deals, to take a step back and say, wait, because we can get in tendency to say, oh yeah, we know the right decision. But I found it to be very helpful when we step back and bring other people into the decision making to cover those blind spots, so that way when we finally get to the table, what we're signing we're comfortable with, right? And yeah, we may not imagine all the scenarios, but if we can glean enough, if we can put the right people around us, we can probably get ahead of some of that stuff before it kills us. Any other questions for Ian?
Question. You said from your experience with EA that you kind of had this like anti-management thinking, but then you kind of backtracked on that with your own management style. So curious, what takeaways did you bring to still have a team that is accountable, but also has freedom in decision making?
Yeah, I mean, that is still tough at this point. So now that we have 12 people, so at the indie studio, I'm working with 2 people that I've worked with for a decade. You can almost predict what each other are going to say, and do. There's tons of accountability because we were all our own experts in our area. So there wasn't much, but now with a team of 12, I still actually am really adamant for no managers. Everyone reports to me. And I was just looking at today and tomorrow are my first days that I've had one-on-ones with everyone, and I have like full calendar both days, so I'm not looking forward to it all. But it's to me, I think the studio that I want to build and always want to build is a team of people that are really senior and I can trust. That's just the main difference. Now we have hired younger people and we do want to do mentorship, and it's hard to only hire like the highest paid people in the industry. Eventually my bosses are not cool with that. But I think it's to me always about just that trust level and not hiring someone that I can't trust and keeping someone that I can't trust to finish stuff with their own, autonomy. And again, that was the part of EA. There was all this effort and work to dictate out your work, to schedule how many hours you thought it was going to take you so that the manager above you could check and make sure that those hours were done. And his manager could bubble that all up into a spreadsheet and see how many total hours were done and then relay that to the COO. It was just this crazy amount of tracking, which in essence to me always felt like I don't trust you to finish what you said you were going to do, and I need to hold you accountable. And so for me and for our team now, it's that, does everyone understand what we're building by next Friday? Okay, cool. See you next Friday. And when things aren't working, then we can talk it out. But like that's the level of accountability I want, and that's what we're doing now. So it's retaining a flat structure and a lot of trust.
Thanks.
Yeah. I remember somebody did a presentation, Ben, at some event that you did, and they were just talking about the hallmarks of the leadership, and that part of it was not it's giving people the autonomy to be able to make decisions, and what you do is you hold them accountable to the outcome. Like, are they meeting the outcome? And if they don't, then you have to have a conversation with them. And if they do meet it, then it's like great. But how empowering that is. And so I really agree with that kind of structure where it's just like you're not like diving into people's numbers every single day. It's just like, hey, I need to be able to trust you to pull this because I got stuff to do, right? Especially in a small startup. And so here's a goal, and as you said, if we don't get there, then we need to have a conversation, right? So yeah.
And a lot of times, a lot of that is, can you clearly articulate what you want them to build? If you can't, are they good enough to kind of build it without your guidance? You can throw stuff at people in games and just say, I really wish that the sign-in flow was better. And then you're just sort of like, okay, that guy's good at that, and I know that he can run with it and he's going to do a good job. And if you don't think that they can run with that level, then you do have to do the work up front of like, here's all the steps I want you to build. But if you are super vague and you don't really think that they're good enough at it, and then you come around to the following Friday and it's kind of a mess, it's really on you that you didn't kind of find the right thing for that person. And that still happens to me. I can be guilty of just sort of like, I was thinking the thing the camera should be a little bit cooler, and you just like send that off. And then it comes back and you're like, that's not as cool as I thought I was thinking, hold on, I'll do it. And so there's sort of like some level of trust that burns you too.
Yeah. And then like I also suffer from that a little bit too, right? Like you throw something out and then you look at it, and then one of the things I realized is that no one will ever do things to the expectation that I will. So it's unfair, you know, like you said, it's unfair for them to be able to articulate what's in my mind. But I find that there is a balance that I have to like sometimes pull back. It's like, well, this is not exactly how I would have done it, but does this get the job done, and does it solve
fine,
it?
right?
Like, yeah, it's fine, right? Let's see. We have a question from Abdullah.
Yes. Hey, Ian, thank you for the call.
Yeah,
Ian,
no problem.
We are working on an app as well, right? So I've heard your story, seen. Now, with all your experience, tell me the best practices you have learned of going to market. And in this day and age, what is the best mode of marketing that you think has worked well for you, or you have learned how to work it?
Yeah, so I mean, business intelligence, so analytics is like a number one, a key. So instrumenting and knowing where your users are going in your app, whether they're coming back, and all the retention and metrics like that are number one. You should not ship an app without knowing, at the very least, how far they get into the flow and if they're coming back. And then in terms of marketing, the number one channel is still Facebook and running Facebook ads. And now things are about to change with Apple because of I'm not sure if you've seen any of that, but they're enabling a lot more privacy and more restriction on devices by default. So a lot of Facebook stuff for Apple will likely have to change. But in terms of targeting, but the targeting that you could do on Facebook is of course scary and awful, but it is very effective for a business. I mean, you can go, I could put in enough likes and audience restrictions that I could probably get only Ben, for example, to see my app without knowing him by name. You know, it's pretty wild.
I have some peculiar likes. That's why I have some categories that only I fall into.
Only you have, yeah, right.
Yeah, that's cool.
So yeah, but yeah, those are the two things. I mean, the business intelligence. I mean, right now we're releasing a game and soft launch. That's another thing that we do often in games is pick one category that you're kind of not that you're okay with if you burn it, if you do it wrong. So we often launch in the Philippines first, for example, just because it's really cheap to acquire users versus America or Canada, or but then it's also primarily English speaking, so you don't have to localize, and you just can kind of get a good read. And so just like this last week, we bought 500 installs in via an ad campaign, and just watch them funnel through the app. And just check metrics and see. And we have problems. We have lots of technical problems. We didn't account for the majority of the internet speed in the Philippines is really low, and so we had a lot of spots where we didn't, for example, protect multiple button clicks. So they're sitting there and like spamming a button. Why isn't this working? And they're like firing off 1 million server requests, and then their app crashes. So that there's like a territory like that we're sort of okay with losing. We're going to have 2,000-3,000 users go through there that maybe get an app experience that's not very good. And, maybe we lose them, but that's usually just kind of what you do that soft launch period.
Yeah. Well, man, listen, what you don't know will and can hurt you, man. I really appreciate you spending time with us today.
Yeah,
you're
pleasure.
one of the shining examples of what Orlando has to offer.
That's very
entrepreneurs
nice.
around the world. Hey, folks. This is Ian Cummins over at Glue now, and man, like I said, we really appreciate you joining us today.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ian.
All right.
See you guys.